there's certainly quite a lot of precipitation, as they call it. And
Yeah, yeah. I definitely have to wear my glasses when I'm driving at night now in the rain. It's safest for everyone. But good morning, James Gorry. How are you?
I'm all the better for seeing you on this beautiful day, Peter.
Thank you. You always warm my heart, especially with that lovely lilt in your voice. So, welcome to the Councilio sessions. Um, let's start off with some introductions. You are quite well known, my friend, in the Australian and global technology industry. So, give us a little bit of a rundown on who James Gorry is.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thanks, Peter, for the opportunity to be here as well and to share my life journey. Yeah, I was dragged up in Dublin, and that's where the accent comes from. It's very hard to get rid of an Irish accent. And yeah, I went to school, and I love drawing and art. And my father is an art dealer in Dublin, and hence my long life sort of affinity towards art and furniture. And I went through school and didn't do very well in school, unfortunately, and ended up getting kicked out of school at 15. But my father wanted me in the business, so I joined his business, the Gorry Gallery in Dublin, where I restored paintings and learned how to hang paintings in exhibitions and dealt with a lot of people. I did that till I was about 21, and I met a beautiful Australian girl, and I decided to leave and went off to Australia, which is a pretty ballsy thing to do. That was in 1990, I think it was. That's quite a long time ago, 36 years ago. And yeah, I was a young man with the world ahead of me, and came to Australia with a few $1,000s and had to get a job, and took a job selling cars, of all things. I loved automotive. Every boy in their 20s wants a car. So the car industry was fascinating for me. And I took a job here in Brisbane with John Hawkins at West Point Nissan, and soon started selling new cars. And over a period of 7 or 8 years, I became sales manager. I was number one in Australia for selling cars. And I sort of learned from that industry that, talking to people and being with people is still the key to business, and it will not hopefully ever disappear. And like we're doing today, as humans, we sort of sat around the campfire maybe 20,000 years ago or a million years ago, and we talked. And I think that story of life, for me, I think I probably would call myself a storyteller, has been really one of the reasons why I've been so quite successful in my career. And I always remember when I was at West Point, I sold a car to a guy who worked for a technology company here in Brisbane called Dad3 back in the day. And he did a finance application to buy the car, and his finance application had to put down his income. And he was earning $280,000 a year selling photocopiers. When I saw that, I sort of went, I don't know if I'm going to make enough money out of the car industry, and I could buy a dealership and become a dealer principal. It was not my goal in life. So
It
I
wasn't
decided
wasn't John Grant, was it?
it was John Grant
Before he
would have been
became CEO,
that's
he
right.
drove
Yeah.
some nice cars.
No, it wasn't John. It was another guy. I won't mention the name, but anyway, yeah. So when I went home that evening, I said to my wife at the time, I said, "Look, there's this guy earning this sort of money. This is crazy. I'm earning, half of that, or if even that, and I'm, pretty good at sales, but the car industry didn't have that, you know." And she said, "It's the it industry, James." I said, "What's the it industry?" And she remember she had a magazine, Cosmopolitan, and on the front of the Cosmopolitan magazine, it had it industry and the next big thing. And I said, "What's the it industry?" And she says, "It's information technology." Of course, I was calling it it. It was the IT industry. Of course, that's how much I knew about it. So I set up myself a task to get out of the motor industry and get into IT, or the it industry. Bought a message, a Newton from Apple, one of the first PDAs. And I decided I was going to learn about technology. And the Apple, the PDA was breaking, groundbreaking. And then I went out and bought, which cost an arm and a leg at the time, a PCM CIA card. I'm talking about, old-fashioned modem here, and put it into the PCM CIA slot, disconnected the phone, and with a bit of toying around, managed to connect through my ISP at the time, PowerUp, to the internet. The noises and all that. And I was live on the internet. I remember sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? What is this thing? This is a portal into the world from a little boy's house in Brisbane, looking out at all this, just a www page. I didn't even know how to navigate the browser. But that changed, and I worked very hard. And yeah, I got out of the motor industry and got into selling document management software with Knowledge One, which is a Sydney-based company still around with Frank McKenna. He's the CEO and still is. And because I could close deals in the motor industry and could sell cars, I just asked the question, if I could put together a deal today, which was in the realms of what you were trying to achieve financially and with the business solution you're looking to get, could we do a deal? And they shook hands with me, people. And I was closing deals left, right, and center. And all of a sudden, I'd done like 400 or 500% of plan in the first 6 months of the company. So I knew there was a lot of people who'd become software developers and they'd become salespeople. But I was just a born salesperson. And at that time, I realized that, getting into the nitty gritty of the mechanics of products is for the technical people, and the mastery of sales as a profession. I saw very quickly that I could make a lot of money and go very far. And I remember I did some counseling or career guidance with somebody, and I said, I want to work with a smart company with smart people. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. Also, I want to have the ability to travel and work with global people all around the world. And that's when you have a focus and a goal, what actually happened. It's sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And as I'll talk about later, where that took me to the deepest parts of the Amazon jungle. And, it's quite remarkable how that sort of young mentoring that you receive. I think that's one of the things I've done all my life as well. And my time in IBM, mentoring people and spending time, which is free for me. And that, time, everyone wants to be paid for their time, but spending time with people is a very important thing. And when people spend time with me as a younger person, the influence that it had over me, I didn't realize it, but it really established a firm set of goals, of understandings of yourself. And that's something I continue to do and really enjoy it.
So
But
you mentioned your dad and the fact that he runs a gallery in Dublin. I believe he still does that today. So he was obviously an early influence for you. What were his thoughts when little Jim took off to Australia and started selling cars?
I
Coming
kind of
from
had
a
a bit of
fine art background.
I kind of had a bit of a falling out with my father, to be honest with you. So yellow young men, I think I was even listening to something about a zookeeper in the ape enclosure in Taronga Zoo, and said that once the young chimpanzee becomes a young man in the chimpanzee empire, the father wants to kill him, or he wants to, there's a friction. I think that's really what happened. I had different goals. And at 15, when I left school, I was very immature, probably more mature than a 15-year-old would be today. But, so my father's a third generation antique dealer and picture dealer and restorer in Dublin. And my great grandfather, James Gorry the first, he started off with a furniture business in Dublin and then got into paintings. And then his son went off and did restoration and became a picture restorer, which is quite a complex task. And I did that for 5 years. And my father's like an apprentice to my father. And that's probably what I'm really doing today in another way. I'll talk about how it's come full circle. And my interest in art and paintings is a financial one as well. It's quite a lucrative business to be in. You discover Irish paintings all around the world, which I've had some success in doing, and do it on a monthly basis, a daily basis. But my father and my mother both did a great job looking after us. I have a sister as well who's head of a very good school in Dublin and a school teacher. But it was a difficult time. I left Australia, and I think, you read about the Hanslow's hierarchy of needs. I had everything in Dublin, the family name, very, very good client base, celebrities, rock stars, all of the who's who in Dublin were buying pictures from my father. When I came to Australia, no one knew who James Gorry was. So I started off very clean and very fresh, which was actually a good thing because it meant that I had to build myself from a point of truth about me. But I'm very, very close to my father, and I'm actually going back there in a couple of weeks. And I do spend a lot of time in Ireland now that I've sort of had a bit of a career break and a bit of change in direction. So he's a fabulous guy. If you're ever in Dublin, you can always go into the Gorry Gallery, and there's always a chair there to sit and have a chat. And he's a bigger storyteller than I am.
Well, that's saying something.
I leg off a dog.
And you, what did you do to get kicked out of school? Or was it a series of events?
There's unfortunate events. Yeah. It's a great question. And my sons might be watching this podcast, so I have to be careful. But yeah, the Catholic school that I went to had the systemic issue of priests who were not doing the right thing with children. And several of my friends today, and my best friends who have passed on, were interfered with very badly in the school. And I was a very stubborn individual. Um, I didn't really like authority very much. So when authority came my way, that was my chance to put in a fight. And I wasn't prepared to be taken into a room after school for, all other purposes. And I protested about it very, very aggressively. And my father, his politics at the time was probably not what I understood. My father was the head of Sinn Féin in Dublin, which is the Republican movement, the political arm. And he's very heavily involved with the Republican movement. And today he talks very, very much about it. But I always remember outside my school in the city, my father's poster for vote number one, Jim Gorry for Sinn Féin, was on the pole. And afterwards, when I left school, many of my friends said to me, the only reason why they didn't pick on you, he says, is because they knew your father was in Sinn Féin, and that would mean if you went home and told your dad someone had done something, there could be a very, very serious ramification, which at the time I didn't realize, but actually my father's politics protected me. In hindsight, it was a blessing. But then days that hopefully are not as plentiful in the school system, and luckily I didn't have any interference at all, thank God, but it was all around me. So
Yeah.
I had many, many frictional confrontations with the school, and eventually then one particular priest hit me, and I hit him back, and king hit him.
Mm.
So my father said, "You're not going back to that school."
Yeah.
So that was it.
That'll definitely get you kicked out from my memory of Catholic schools.
Yeah, and I mean, spare the rod and spoil the child. I used to come home, my hands completely raw from the cane.
Mm.
Um,
It's astonishing how far we've come socially in such a short period of time, and those experiences that you've just shared, how widespread they were, not just in Ireland, but obviously, Ireland was in many ways the great colonizer for Catholicism, so they popped up in every country. Certainly, my family has Irish roots. They came out to North Queensland in the 1850s and became cane farmers, and but always always had very uh, strong ties back to that Irish heritage, because it is a very revered culture, which is one of the ironies of when people talk about Ireland. It's sort of like this all these conflicts in terms of religion and growth and poverty and culture and all this. It's such a fascinating, country, and has been for a long time. It's back in the news the last couple of days.
and it's an interesting conversation, because when I look at the troubles in Ireland, and I went to Bobby Sands' funeral, and heavily involved in the Republican movement, my father was, and I went to Portlaoise prison and visited many of my father's personal friends who were political prisoners, and not criminals, but political prisoners. And there's a definition there which I won't go into, but the Irish and the British, for all of the problems that they've had, managed to sit down at the table on the Good Friday Agreement with Gerry Adams and the team, all led to all the prisoners being released, the cessation of all violence. Both sides killed thousands of people, and people don't. When you're over here in Australia, the news is often a little bit biased that the IRA were the villains here. But regardless of who was right or wrong, they had the manliness or the humanity in each of them, which would put their religion aside and just sit down at the table. And I just wish that some of the other activities in the world today, which seem to be relentless on the news, and attacks and war and bigotry and long entrenched hate, and it is possible if maybe Gerry Adams would go over and sit down with the powers in the Middle East and America and Israel and Iran and sit down and say, look, there's a path out of this. You just can't see it. And we did it. It'd be lovely
Mm,
to see that sort of,
mm.
uh, you know, contagion of peace be seen
There
to
was
be
a
possible.
there was also a very different platform, certainly through the 90s, with the rise of U2 culturally, globally. I've just finished watching Rattle and Hum again, and the passion and the platform that they had to really talk about that openly, and obviously was going on in a time of apartheid as well, and all those sort of global institutions that were being torn down. And it's one of those things that I don't we don't seem to have that same cultural platform, because everything's available to everyone all the time. And when you too used to show up in Australia, um, you you hadn't had the opportunity to see them on the internet. Like, you bought a ticket and you went to a concert and you sort of sat there and you listened and adored them and loved the music, and all that stuff, has really, really changed. Which isn't to say that that's a pathway forward, but just how different, you know, things have become now, and how tightly entwined. Even, some of the new documentary out around, Michael Jackson, and some of the social cohesion work he was trying to do in Los Angeles to bring together the Crips and the Bloods, and the sort of warfare with the gangs in
Yes.
South LA and all those sorts. We don't seem to have those same sort of, um, music, cultural platforms like that we used to. And I think that's part of everything being so accessible all the time. And um, does it lose credibility? Does it lose power? Does it lose voice? Is this just another, thing that's going to fill 10 seconds on a news feed in the morning, and then it gets replaced tomorrow by something else?
You raise a very interesting point, and I had this conversation the other day with somebody about the famine in Ireland, which really, in my view, was one of the key sort of what they call breakthrough stages of Irish politics, and one in five people, I think, died of starvation in Ireland. And then it fashioned the politics because of the lack of assistance that the Irish people received from overseas. It was very token from the UK, if nothing. And but people don't understand that Britain owned Ireland. And it was their country. It was Ireland's part of the empire, and yet they let everyone die. And I think that really did fashion quite a lot of the DNA inside of Irish people to be, in the struggle, they would fight harder. And I've had a little bit of that in my life. I have a mantra which I call refuse to lose. Anyone who's watching this who knows me in the business world, I use that refuse to lose thing. For me, it's like a DNA that I'm going to get out there and I'm not going to give in. And I think that the struggles of the famine and the political situation in Ireland, and, as a child growing up, seeing every day on the radio, bombing, cars, people blown apart. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to live in the Middle East at the moment. But as a child, I remember it was very, very very confronting to see this. And it's on the news all the time, every day. Every day, switch on the radio, someone's been blown up, another car bombs. And I think that you too, and I've met Bonner several times, and Paul McGuinness is very good client of my father in Dublin. And we sold a lot of paintings to them for their houses in America, and I've hung pictures in their houses and everything. I can't go into the details of too much, but they were certainly very well educated boys. They went to Blackrock College around the corner from where I lived, and they managed to put the music then behind the music was the politics. They used the music to carry the political understanding of Ireland, that Ireland's not a bad place. When I'm going back to Ireland in a couple of weeks' time, I need to go up to the north of Ireland, which I haven't been up since Bobby Sands' funeral. But Belfast in the north, property's got the top 5 Michelin restaurants in the world. The whole place is totally transformed. And the migration issue is a big issue in Ireland at the moment, and it is a topic that's what caused that problem yesterday. And it's migration. I'm a migrant though, and you're a migrant, and we have to say we're sorry and we, welcome to country, and all of those things have changed. And I when I was in South America a couple of months ago, I used to sort of say, well, is there a welcome to country for the indigenous people to be respected in South America? And the answer is no way. So we've come a long way, Australia, and it's various different views on this, but a peaceful day in the world is a better day than a day that hasn't got peace. As the older I get, peace has to be the focus of everybody, regardless of your religion or your beliefs. But it's an interesting one. Irish people have emigrated out of Ireland, and that great brain drain that happened, and the education. I mean, one of the great things I received was a great education. I left school at 15, and my son's education today, both at a private school here in Brisbane, and my son's 17 and my other one's 15. Their education is fantastic. But when I left school, the education that I had, I thought was excellent. And when I arrived in Australia, I thought it was actually hard to detect that I hadn't completed my leaving certificate, or year 17, or whatever you call it. But these are big
Mm.
stories, Peter. A lot of things around the world we can't do, but we can just comment on them. But
Well, we have a place. We have a place and a role to play, even if it's day to day with our, as you say, with our own kids, or just in our dealings. You know, being able to share stories and talk civilly and figure out a way through, and respecting history and all those sorts of things. But the principal at grammar at the moment, he was my economics teacher back in grade 11 and 12 in the late 80s. So when I came back to Brisbane and I saw that he was the principal, I'm like, oh wow, you know, that's
it's a pretty big job. He's pretty
pretty
fascinating.
big job. That
And
is a
that's
massive
the school's
organisation.
doubled in size. You know, the whole complex has been rebuilt and expanded. And
Yeah.
it's a good school. I wanted my boys to go to a school that had a very lack of focus on just Anglo-Saxon Catholic or Presbyterian. You know, I wanted them to have that. And my partner at the time, she was Catholic, and she really wanted them to go to possibly, you know, the full Catholic school. And I said, well, in all my international work that I've done, I think that it's very important as a father or a parent to open your children's eyes to multiculturalism, and especially in Australia. We have such a multicultural society. It brings so many benefits: cooking, food, art, culture. Everything's fantastic, you know. And compared to the rest of the world, where multiculturalism isn't always easy, but that's a great school. And at point in cases, I think my son Jack got an A in Chinese, and his friends who are Chinese didn't get A's. So he speaks fluent Chinese, my son at 17. And I said to him, I said, there's three languages you need to learn: the language you love, speak good English, and if you can learn Spanish or Chinese, you're set up for the rest of your life. So I think he's got to do pretty well. Chinese, anyway, is certainly a good language to have in Australia.
Yeah, the Gorry legacy will continue. So back to tech. You started out um, selling knowledge, document
Sure.
management
Yeah.
stuff, which was, that was where, that was partly before where it all began. I mean, ERP wasn't even a thing when you started. That really didn't come in until the late 90s, and those financial management systems and things. But what was your career in enterprise technology from there? Because from there was big leaps from the early 90s to the end of that decade. And then certainly things just exploded from the end of the 90s and haven't stopped exploding until here we are, a couple of aged technology journey people experiencing another one. So what happened from there?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a headhunter rang me from Gateway Computers. You remember the black and white box?
Mm-hmm.
American company. This is sort of a competitor to Dell at the time, but more of a consumer product. And they wanted to get into corporate world. They said, you know, can you get us there? And I said, yeah, no problem. Anyway, I took the job, state manager for Gateway. I won a couple of contracts at UQ and won some things at Queensland Health and different things, and managed to get the product out of the consumer market into the, the corporate world. And bang, the company went out of business. They decided to close down, and we were all made redundant. And my good friend and manager for Kevin Pisker, was the head of Microsoft afterwards for North America, and a very good friend of mine, a Canadian guy, packed up the shop. But we all got handsome redundancies, and I sat down, and as part of that process, and again, thank you to Gateway Computers, they gave me a professional development course as part of the redundancy. So I went off and sat down with a person, went through the whole professional development course, which I still actually do on a daily basis in my mind about what I want to do every day when I'm interviewed by my CEO GPT, which I'll talk about every morning that I have in my meeting. But that technology opportunity, I sort of said, no, I want to get back into professional services if I can. I wanted to work with smarter people around business. So what happened then was I saw a job at BDO, Kendall's, they were called at the time, BDO Kendall's in Brisbane. And I went along the job interview and I said, about ERP? We've got a Microsoft practice here where we sell Navision or Xapta. I think it was actually Microsoft Great Plains. So I said, yeah, that's not a problem. I can do that, excellent. I know all about finance. And so anyway, they gave me the job. And Tony Schiffman, who's the managing partner there in Brisbane for many years now, has sort of stepped aside. He's on the global board of BDO out in the US. a very good friend of mine. I went in and started selling Microsoft Great Plains, and we did really well. And then I saw the one night there was a ad on in the Financial Review. I used to read it every day, that SAP had just introduced a smaller product called, what's it called? Connect and Go, or Stop and something, Get Up and Go. It was basically the big ERP SAP templated into a smaller form factor that could be sold for under $100,000 and implemented. Good like Mile or QuickBooks sort of. I think it was from the company they'd bought in Israel. Anyway, I went off and started up an SAP practice, and all of a sudden we'd sold 4 or 5 large SAP implementations that were, under $250,000 implemented. And it was a fantastic thing. But then what happened was there's a thing called compliance, and BDO had a huge audit team, and a lot of the audit customers, I would be going around talking to the partners and seeing if there's opportunities in the client base. But that was very complicated. And I sort of said to Tony Schiffman, who was my manager at the time, I said, I think it's going to become a problem. So I said, I'm going to actually go off and do something else. And I want to leave you on good terms, but I think you should probably get this practice and sell it and get out of it. So he did that after I left and sold it off and distanced the technology division from a point of view of managing people's ERP and then doing the audit on the ERP is too close to the bone. And Enron had just happened, and there was a lot of Sarbanes-Oxley compliance things that cut it. So I landed a job at IBM in Brisbane, and that was in 2005. 2005, it was 2005, yeah. And off I went in Software Group as public sector lead for Queensland Northern Territory, selling the whole portfolio of software, Tivoli, Rational, DB2, Lotus Notes, or it was called Time, and WebSphere Portal. So I was the guy for public sector, and very quickly I did really well. And all of a sudden I found myself national sales manager. And within a year of that, I suddenly became the business unit executive. I think that's when we first met, Peter. So I was running with up to 5 pillars in the Software Group at the time. I was running one of them for Australia and New Zealand, with about 100 or so people, plus channel partners. It was a big job. I was traveling all the time, and I worked with some of the greatest people I've ever worked with in IBM. And
it was a massive job, because I think this is where, historical context is important as well. We're talking about IBM in the early 2000s, which had gone through its resurgence, had almost gone to the wall. How to Make an Elephant Dance, or whatever it was called, came out.
I've got it here. Yeah. I just had it out of my hand last night, looking at it, laughing. I was laughing.
Yeah, and then global resurgence. Really happened. IBM was back. It was big, as you say. Software was massive at the time, and IBM was big in the software game because it all related to information and the growth of collaboration and things like that. So to say that you were a part of that, to anyone sort of coming up in the industry today, wouldn't necessarily have an appreciation for how sort of large that was. And I think it was around that time that we met, and did share some time also at the Swan and Dolphin in Orlando a couple of years at Lotusphere, which was one of the greatest tech conferences that's ever existed in the last couple of decades. And what a shame it was when it all ended. But it did. So
there were some excellent people there, and I still speak to Alistair Rennie, who's a fabulous guy, just being on the other night, and all the team here in Australia. I still keep in touch with some of them. And it was a family, it was a community of people. It was like a LinkedIn business, and that's what LinkedIn, what IBM Connections was basically a corporate version of social media that we brought out. And that was when I sort of took over the lead for the business. IBM Connections, the ability to build content and, content management and portals, all that. So IBM led the way in that, the top 3 anyway. But this push to bring social media into the enterprise and how that pushed forward has got so many similarities. And I was looking at a slide deck from Lotusphere only a couple of days ago, and it basically follows the same adoption problems that we have with AI, and we'll talk about that later on. But there's a lot of similarities to resistance to sharing information. And
Mm.
IBM Blue Pages was the internal thing we had, which is where it sort of was born from, because with 260,000 staff, I mean, that's a large number. If I was in front of a customer who was an airline business and they had an SAP system that they needed to find a specialist skill that would have the ability to build an API into some other luggage control system that wasn't in SAP, I could actually get into Blue Pages and IBM and find that person by their skills. And that was the great thing about IBM. We could find people, subject matter experts, and bring them in. Out of the 250,000 people, there was a lot of smart people that read books. And, it was the best it had ever been. But
It was incredible.
like,
It was incredible. Yeah.
like everything in life, there is, a chance in life that sometimes people miss. And sometimes the biggest risk in your career is staying when you are successful. You know, on my success, I actually had one that a couple of weeks after I won the award, which was the top 2% of sales managers globally. We blew plan. I think we did 350% of plan for the year. And that's a big number to overachieve. And I made a lot of money. I won't lie about it. We all did. But the Warren Buffetts of the world had invested in IBM, and they had this grand master plan to be able to build it up even bigger. The empire would be so big. But the problem is they cut off the tea and coffee. They started to do silly things, changed sales plan to be really sort of constructive dismissal for some people. And I went and met with Steve Mills, who was the head of STG, so the whole group, who reported to Ginny Ramiti. And I was the most profound moment in my life. I stood there in Madison Avenue. I've got photographs with him and all my team, flew them all business class to America. At the time, when business wasn't available, but we'd done so well. And for me, that was the moment I said, I'm out of here. And I left IBM, and everybody was
Mm.
devastated. I was like, how could you leave? Like, it's like Maradona quitting soccer in the
Yeah.
in the World Cup. It was,
It
yeah,
was big. It was big. Can I share a little anecdote with you?
please.
In my role as analyst, I obviously attend a lot of events and am privileged enough to meet a lot of the world's top tech executives. And back in the day, you're right, Steve Mills, he was one of them. I think he was running like $60 billion of the $100 billion IBM business. Like he was the like he was the black ops guy in IBM, and he was formidable. And to this day, so I started in the analyst world in 1999. To this day, and of all the conversations and all the conferences I've been to, and generally when we go to a conference, we get to have one-on-ones with some of the senior execs. That was the most frightening, intimidating one-on-one that I've ever had, because I challenged him on some stuff that they'd released. I don't know, I think it was in Las Vegas at a IBM Information on Demand event, and they'd made some new announcements, and they said we're backing this with 2,000 consultants, and he was saying all this on the main stage. And so when I got to have some one-on-one time with him, I said, Steve, of the 2,000 consultants, how many of those are actually based in my part of the world, out in Asia Pacific, even in Australia or whatever? And he's like, well, none. We're starting here in North America. I'm like, oh, okay. So you can see how that might be sort of challenging, balancing the announcement with it. And he just went off. Like he drilled me in a way that, you see some people who don't like the question, and they're like, I'm in a position of power, and I'm going, and you could do that back then. I was young and insignificant, and I walked out of there shaken, and I'm like, I still remember it to this day. I'm 52 years old, and it still shakes me in my boots. So, but yeah, he was an amazing, character, and interesting, like through the next leadership changes at IBM, how he quietly retired. I don't think he was probably quiet behind the scenes, but yeah, IBM at that time in global software was massive. But I think also what's really important in that story, um, like your global success out of Queensland was extraordinary, and we can't underplay the significance of the kind of technology that we're talking about as well, because corporate social computing didn't exist. This was pre Facebook stuff. And as you say, something that IBM always did well was take its internal systems and then try to commercialize it and all the rest of it. And so they did that through Lotus. But a surprising amount of what we now take for granted in enterprise collaboration or knowledge management, and even some of the AI enabled work, really traces back to the ideas that were being explored by IBM through Lotus Connections. And, even the modern digital workplace platforms like 365 or Slack, which is now part of Salesforce, or Confluence at Atlassian, or all that, this enterprise knowledge graphs, which has become such a fundamental part of AI today, and enterprise search and expertise, the stuff that you're mentioning around, trying to find key staff inside, the organization. So this whole concept, like you remember, it was also at the time it was going head to head with Yammer, which is now being rebranded and rolled in. So this was a pivotal moment in corporate technology, and I think this whole industry just continues to stand on the shoulders of these inflection points that have gone. And then we get to now and we're like, yeah, we use Confluence and all the rest of it. And then it's like, that stuff didn't exist when we were kids. It didn't even exist when, like, I was a 30-year-old working in bit, and then it all happened, and just so influential in how much it's changed.
IBM, when I talked to my father, when I said I've joined IBM, he's like, "What? Wow, IBM." It's like, it's like NASA. It had this, you know,
Yes.
it was the ultimate achievement in your career. And then when I became business unit executive, Tony Best was the head of software group here. Tony, a fabulous guy. I really, really enjoyed working with him, and Glenn Boreham and the likes. But I met a lot of very interesting people. IBM had this sort of thing of the celebrity. I always remember, I was talking about the other day, and I was at Lotusphere event, and there was a guest speaker, which today is unfortunately not on the, he's a bit on the nose. It's Kevin Spacey. And he was there, and he was talking about the keynote speech about how at the top of his career and his income and his success, that he would always, when he got out of the lift, press the button down. And he said it was called sending the lift down. And I always remember using that for many years as a leader. My responsibility was to reach into the business and take a graduate and bring that graduate up through the business and mentor them. And that's what happened to me. And it's something that I think we as humans need to continue doing. But in IBM, we used to meet some of the most amazing people. I mean, I even saw Neil Armstrong on stage. I mean, first man
Yeah.
on the moon. It's quite remarkable. But again, as my father always says, never confuse experience with learning, with a long time of learning very little. And IBM lost the way. And, it wouldn't surprise me if in 5 years' time, I mean, some of the stuff that's happening with AI and the ability to take down the mainframe business, which was the bastion of the magic, when IBM, the COBOL software and the magic screwdriver with the mainframe is probably, but it was 50% of IBM's revenue, and probably, is at risk at the moment because of what AI can do with Claude, particularly.
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting, and I don't know whether we talk about it now or come back to it, but they've what Arvind has done since he's come in. He was open to, like, when he came in and set the new strategy in place. There was a lot of skepticism globally, I think, and rightly so, because IBM always found a way to get in its own way, and and would quite often, most often, be the smartest people in the room, but translating that into global traction. And they always seem to eventually get their lunch eaten by smaller, faster, more nimble, less intelligent organizations. And I think so when Arvin came in and said, right, we're going to do hybrid, we're going to do AI and
What's
whatever, like whatever other pillars. And going, okay, yeah, fine. It's a sort of a restructure. But from what I've actually seen in the last, especially the last 18 months, their strategy is really coming together, and they're exhibiting very non IBM sort of traits, especially around what they're doing with their consulting and their AI businesses. So I've been skeptical and sort of critical of them for a while now, and but that's certainly starting to change, and because they are one of the organizations that is really starting to eat AI inside their own organization. And I put out a piece a couple of weeks ago about how they're turning that on their managed services business for security, which is astonishing because like humans cannot simply keep up with AI level cyber attacks anymore. It just happens too fast. And so, how you apply that into your security business is going to be a real critical differentiator. I think they've been making some really leading steps in that. And the other thing is they sort of, I think, saw the separation around the mainframe environment where mainframe's still critical to all large businesses on the planet, whether you're in finance or airlines or insurance or banking or like healthcare or whatever it is. It's still really important technology, but they basically carved out global technology services and sold it, and that became Kyndryl today. So GTS is essentially a separate company, and that was to compete with, I think, the other large Indian system integrators in that space. But we have seen other vendors who have typically been hardware builders of mainframes, like Fujitsu, famously, they're out of mainframes from 2030 and they're on track for that. Now, think about that from a Japanese company that's always built that, and they decided 5 years ago we're out. So the mainframe hardware stuff is really changing, but they've kept on with their Z series. They're doing a lot in power, but they're looking at how they can apply AI directly at the point of transaction interaction. So they're doing some interesting things. So it's kind of like, oh, wow, it just takes a couple of years to to really implement a strategy like that. But I think more to your point, it takes a couple of decades to really change the lived experience that people have had of IBM. This contrast of, like you said, if you worked at IBM, it was kind of like working at NASA. It was like the pinnacle. It was considered like to be
a scientist of the IT industry. You
right.
were, yes.
Absolutely. And look, I still joke that I think they probably don't care how they do commercially, like even in business or, in other parts, because behind the scenes, they probably have all these amazing contracts with the federal government that actually, drives their organization, which we will never get to see. But so, yeah, fascinating times. But
Their bigness, though, I always say you don't have to be big to be strong. I said it to myself, you have to be big to be strong. And
it's
IBM
a very Irish thing to say.
It's too big, and that was their weakness. And the inability to move quickly, and especially in a world which we'll talk about, the way of work, the future of work, and that's but not only how you sell your work and you get paid for it, but how you deliver it is completely changed. And big companies with old processes and procedures, and they're very, very difficult to change those quickly. And that is probably the Achilles heel for a lot of big companies at the moment, and they're vulnerable. And we'll talk more about that maybe as we go forward. But
well, I want to ask you about that now, because I think it's directly related, because to the point that connections, that first move into corporate social computing, was so new. There are lots of parallels with AI, and it's kind of like, you should really use this. And a lot of organizations go, yeah, we get it, but why would we just give our staff a toy to play with? And what value is it going to return? Like, and what's the payback and all that kind of stuff? And so, but not only was it new, that there was continual and aggressive change around the portfolio over a couple of years. And so I've always thought how challenging for someone who was carrying a bag or a sales target to be on the street and continually being pushed these things from the top in terms of, the software portfolio, and Steve Mills going, this is the latest thing and you got to get it out there and go on, James, make it happen. You can work miracles and blah, blah, blah. But below you were sitting these very good, but more human sales people who are younger and don't have all the context. And so we're really sort of interested in what kind of effort did it take in terms of bringing the sales teams up to speed and keeping them in the tent and not disillusioned about, well, what is it that we're selling this week, James? Why do you keep actually telling us we've got new things to add? And so how 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 long is that lag in between product launch and sort of market direction and market traction looked at from a sales team perspective?
Yes, I mean, I'm unpacking my old hard drive here. I left IBM 13 years ago, over 13 years ago. And I'm thinking back to the question you've asked. There was two parts of it. You had to be able to sell in IBM to IBMers, because IBMers were STG and Software Group and GTS, and there was different components. And often some of the clients that we would be trying to sell to already had a very large services contract with the services divisions in IBM. So you had to find the client executive, and this matrix of sales inside IBM was very complicated. So I'm just talking about the internal sales to internal existing customers, which was probably the easiest way to sell, because you could attach it into an enterprise license agreement. At the time they were called ELAs or whatever. And you could actually, when the renewal came around, in the stack of 60 existing products, just slide in connections, and the bid manager and the deal makers would make a $600 million deal over 5 years. It would only be a couple of $100,000 inside the pack, but it would be done by IBM Global Finance. So selling internally was very important. So what I managed to do in IBM is, because people kind of liked me because I was less techie than most people. Andrew Stevens, I actually got him to do a video of how IBM Connections worked. I installed it on his iPad and got him to do, and I've got him video on my LinkedIn profile. Look at the video of Andrew doing it. And he would do a weekly podcast, as before podcasts even probably existed, to the rest of IBM in Australia and say, this is IBM Connections. I'm talking to you today from the couch in the hotel where I met Steve Mills yesterday, and Ginny Ramiti said there's 10 things we're going to do. And so he became an evangelist for the brand. And that was remarkable that I achieved his confidence. And Andrew is a very smart guy and came from the services business, and he quickly understood it. So he became an evangelist, and I presented to the board many times at IBM on the value of connections. And that was when the time when there wasn't Facebook on your phone. The phones didn't have that capability at that stage. And connections then became about on the phone. We pushed it into the phone. It was on the stack, And I think that ability to demonstrate software quickly and in your hand on an iPad was a breakthrough, because you can't demonstrate ERP, on a phone. But it was that ability to position it. And then the reps had that ability to go out and talk to clients. And we did some road shows. I think you came on some of those, and Dr. Carl and myself got up on stage and talked about the future of social computing. And we had a bit of a rah-rah going, and there was a lot of buzz then around LinkedIn and Facebook. And I think we sort of managed to rise on those waves where people were concerned in the enterprise that security around sharing things, showing people photographs and sharing things that you're doing on a daily basis with people was okay for moms and dads and kids. But in the enterprise, it wasn't safe, and it wasn't secure, and wasn't ethically correct. So we changed that, start that change process. And today, everyone, is very much familiar with social. We grew up, my kids grew up social. They're social media, completely TikTok fanatics. Things went that way in my day.
Yeah. I mean, everything you've just said applies equally to exactly what's happening with AI now in terms of, the guardrails and all those sort of things. So I just wondered how difficult was it for the sales teams to keep up with how fast the organization was trying to push this stuff out? Like, how do you go from, we've got this product launch, to we're going to sit you down and give you a couple of hours and here's a pack, and then you get out in the street and have the conversations? Like, is that, because surely that takes a little bit of time.
It does, but I do have to say that there's a guy called Craig Hart who was head of the technical team for me, and a fabulous guy. But he was a Lotus guy. And I think there's the Lotus thing. I remember when I joined IBM, the Lotus was part of the portfolio, and it was kind of a bit of a dying, email platform thing, but they reinvented themselves and they got this whole, different story. But the Lotus team that was still there, and I think 80% of the partners had started off in Lotus Notes, they had this almost sort of like religious devotion to the Lotus brand. And it was a contagious sort of feel of they were part of something that was really, really different to the rest of IBM. And there was like a cultural blood that if you had Lotus blood, you weren't really an IBMer. We were kind of the outside sort of group. And that vitality that was in the team was really there when I joined it. I was quite blown away because it's a very different culture. It was like a culture within the culture. And I think the team they were ravenously hungry to find out what was next. Not like selling a database where you've got new, version of the database. It was boring. But the Lotus portfolio and the collaboration suite, when they rebranded, was the forefront of everything. And I think it was an exciting time to talk about, like it is at the moment, about AI, Um, it was one of the buzziest parts of the brand, and everyone wanted to know about it. And when I used to
Well,
present to the board members at the IBM, they all wanted to get connections on their phone. They wanted to go out and show the customers how on the front foot we were. And it was groundbreaking technology.
yeah.
It was exciting. And that excitement, if you're in software and you've been with me, you want to get the latest version of the new Siri down your phone. You know what I mean? Everyone wants to be up there. I've got the best, the latest, the greatest. And that's what IBM in the software group that I was in had that. The great people. Very
It's an interesting,
as well.
it's an interesting insight, I think, especially in light of a lot of the modern platform as a service solutions that are out there. And in in a number of ways, again, Lotus and Lotus Domino, when you sort of bring in the database with it as well, it was very early platform as a service. It's just the world didn't recognize it. People didn't know how to work with it. It didn't hang together as much. You still needed to do all this stuff around service-oriented architectures and middleware, and you needed to really bleed yellow to
Yes.
maximize it. But all the pieces were there. But I think the interesting thing from what you've said is that IBM as a massive portfolio companies, which had lots of brands, lots and lots and lots of software brands, what part of what made Lotus Connection successful when it came out was it's still really important to potentially double down and segment the sales teams to focus on some of these smaller things which our human brain can sort of deal with, that I'm not necessarily out there trying to sell IBM. I'm out there selling these valuable parts of the Lotus brand into the organization. Because again, you can live and breathe IBM every day of your life for 20 years as an IBM insider. You still have to go out and in 20 minutes or less impart all the reasons why a customer should even be having a conversation with you, let alone sell a piece of software. And I think that's some of the challenge that we're seeing, and why the head-to-head investments in platform as a service and AI and a lot of the AI platforms is just being so aggressive, because it's almost like it's just a fire hose to win market share and mind share. And part of the challenge that I'm seeing some of the organizations have is that the sales teams can't keep up. They're like, we're not sure what conversation we should be having with the organization, because the whole world's obsessed now with AI. But what sort of AI is it? Are we having a transformation conversation with someone in the C-suite, or are we having a technical conversation with someone in the IT department, or are we having a conversation with someone in the marketing part of the organization? It's kind of like, what's the message for all these people? And that's why I think we've been here before, but it seems to be there's more cash than ever before that is able to be thrown at trying to win the market share. But I actually think it's having the opposite effect for
Yes.
individual companies that then is sort of intended by doing it in the first place. You know what I mean?
You raise an interesting point, and I think I was sitting here contemplating it because I remember the the signature selling method and the different ways we had processes around it. And IBM taught me how to look at pipeline and yield, and that's probably one of the reasons why I've done well is I can see opportunity where it's not there and fail fast. But the people that we would be talking to in IBM before connections really came out were only IT people. But this is the it word again. Information technology really isn't what the world is about today anymore. I think the chief information officer role isn't who you sell to anymore in a business. It's a business. When you're selling to the org chart of the company, you're probably going into the marketing department, first of all, or the sales department to enable them to use tools, or the safety department. But it's not, technology isn't for the IT department anymore. It's for the whole company. And I think Lotus, the connections product, because it was a social media thing, it wasn't a tool for a specific business unit. It was for all. And I think that's where you saw the sales team could go and drill up a business case with, a part of the business, which wasn't IT. And as we know from AI is not going through the IT department anymore.
It's not. No, it's
It's
not.
not
And yeah,
very different.
there's definitely far more buying centers for technology than there was even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But going back to when, we were walking the streets, you did sell it. You went into the CIO. There's some organizations would have sold to the chief financial officer, but largely it was a technology sell. And that's definitely changed. And I think that's also part of the challenge now, because from a strategic perspective, how can you possibly try to regather all these buying centers to get everyone onto the same page? We know it doesn't happen because organizations are structured around hierarchies and budgets and headcounts and things like that. And we've sort of asked the CIO to step aside over the last 10 years, and they have. And so now who's stepping in to start to make sense of all these AI buying decisions that are happening across different buying centers in the same organizations? And I sort of, been trying to unpack this, and it's part of something that I call the CEO coherence problem, where we've never had more technology than we've ever had before, but we seem to be more confused and have like less access to the information that we want. And it's a lack of coherence driven by the fact that it's everywhere now, and the role that used to be responsible for holding it all together, we asked them to leave the building, and they did. We're like, you were too slow, IT. We didn't like the decisions you were making, so we've gone and made it all our own. And then, so what's happened is we've created these new sorts of organizations, which, with some exceptions, are quite chaotic. And at the point that we've created these chaotic organizations from a technology leadership perspective, we are now faced with perhaps the greatest inflection point in technology that we've ever faced before. So it's kind of like, if this was by design, we've done it really badly.
And I think, somebody rang me the other day with a job offer to try and, or headhunter, and the chief AI officer, if I had said that to somebody 20 years ago, they'd say, AI, that's artificial insemination. And a friend of mine who's a farmer in Ireland, he always said, oh, the AI man's coming down, and he'd take the sperm from the bull and give it to the cow. And, the whole world has changed, and the future of work is even more uncertain. And I think that the large established companies with big processes and people and roles and position descriptions, there's a level of chaos and fear and uncertainty and doubt about the future. And, there's a lot of, people who won't do AI, and they're going to end up perhaps, the whole world, and you and I spoke about this last week when we met, the language of business has changed. And if you're speaking the old language, now, I actually put a post up on LinkedIn about this a couple of months ago, which is every board member should sit down and open the door for the boardroom to a 15-year-old child. And that 15-year-old needs to come in and sit down and listen to the board meeting. And they might not understand all the financials. They might understand the secretary in the meeting, all the time. So, but when it comes to the messaging of the strategy of the sales team and the messaging of what the product is or the service or the thing they're doing, The world has changed. And if a 15-year-old doesn't understand this, that company will be basically, in my view, eroded by AI. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of these people who are scared because they don't understand what AI is. I mean, AI is a thinking system. It's not a processing tool. And that's the problem with companies, that they look on this as a processing tool and it needs to be put into a process. AI is a thinking system, and that doesn't apply to any department singularly. It
Mm.
applies to everything. And that's
So what?
simple to wire companies that quickly, rewire them.
Yeah, the the youth in the boardroom thing is really interesting because um, there are a couple of large Indian tech companies that did implement youth boards.
Yeah.
Um, they didn't have any authority, but they existed and were funded and operated. And I think as much to kind of go, what are they coming up with compared to what the traditional board is coming up with? And so it's a very valid point. Because we always have these intergenerational changes, and we always think one doesn't understand the other, but increasingly we understand that they're both important to each other, and so getting across that is super important. I agree. So, what I know you're still having lots of conversations in the market. So when you're talking to businesses, um, and please give yourself a plug in terms of the sort of advisory work that you're doing. But what are you seeing right now? Like, what are the people that you're talking to? What are they asking for, and what aren't they asking for that they should be? And like, how are those conversations going?
So I'm sort of working at this sort of intersection of strategy and AI and the commercial execution of AI, because I always believe, it's important to find where the money can be made. So solving problems is one thing, but a lot of people create problems that don't exist. But I think that AI, from my perspective, and I'll talk a little bit about how I use AI 50% of my day for my other businesses I've got later. But I think that there's a great misunderstanding of what AI is. And I think there's going to be a lot of pushback. I saw Eric Schmidt on YouTube the other day, and he was presenting in America, and he was booed off the stage by the students at the university. Then I saw another guy who's a comedian, a Chinese guy, did a presentation the other day, and he was using the F word to F AI, and he's shouting it out, roaring it on stage, and everyone's cheering. And I think there's a fear now that AI has got the ability to hurt people and to damage their careers. And that's a misinformation. Whilst I believe a lot of people's jobs will be redundant, as like the analogy I would use is like, you and I, we own a village in 1860, and we sell hay, and you clean the horses and I water them. We give hay to the horses when the travelers come in and they sleep for the night. And then, a bloke suddenly across the road has a Model T, and it's 1920s or 30s, whatever it is. And he's saying, I need gasoline. And we said, well, maybe we should be selling gasoline because there's a lot of these cars, automobiles with smoke coming out of them. The horses might not be as plentiful. So you have to change. And, then there's the EV comes along, and then there's the electricity and the power and the charging and it's all the different things, and things will evolve. But the rapidness of the evolution is beyond the comprehension of the smartest people. And even this morning, I read my daily podcast and have my interview with my CEO agent. And overnight, there's been an enormous breakthrough in compute regarding AI from Claude. And they're talking about time to do the task instead of, 15 minutes to do what 1,000 people can do. They can now do it in 5 minutes what 1,000 people would take 1,000 days to do. And the leap is so far, it's beyond the comprehension of people. I find a lot of people I'm talking to, mainly people who are of my age group, they don't understand AI. And my job is to explain it in a very simple way without any technology. Don't have to use GPT conversation. Don't have to talk about generative pre-trained transformers and large language models and inference and history and memory. And, that's not valid. But what's happened in the industry is, and the thing that I've seen, and I just completely find it the most scary thing, is that in industry, there's the people who sell things, there's people who manufacture things, and there's people who measure things. In a 1954 article, which is about the practice of managing a business, these three things were pointed out. And I thought were very topical because the measuring people in the business are the people who are at massive risk with AI because their tasks are very, numerically based, and AI deals better with that. AI probably won't be a better salesperson, but it can help salespeople. AI probably won't build things on its own at the moment, but in the future it could. But those measures in the business make up most companies are sort of 50 to 60% of the team is people who are measuring. They're auditing, they're doing reporting, they're finance, they're doing marketing, doing, uh, KPIs and HR. All those things are all measurers. And those people, they'll be replaced. And I've seen 2 or 3 jobs I've been doing with people, and those people, the measurers, are sabotaging the AI projects. And the American elections, which are going to happen later in the next few years, they're actually now talking about nationalizing AI. So all the money that comes from the AI floats in the next couple of weeks, which is trillions, which most people, if you say, what is $1 trillion? Most people don't know what it means. It's the biggest 3 IPOs, with Musk and, all of the stuff that's happening on Anthropic. And then the other bigger one, ChatGPT. That's so big that I think people don't understand it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see a great lack of understanding. And the people of our generation are absolutely paralyzed with fear and uncertainty and doubt by this whole thing. And
Yeah.
I
Well,
see,
I think but we're trying to figure out whether the level of transparency being provided is actually the right information, especially in this world of disinformation, which has become so, everyone's so self-aware now about disinformation, especially, even years after the pandemic and how harmful that was. So on the one hand, we have the leaders in AI saying, yes, it is going to, um, really disrupt the labor market, which it will, right? We have other leaders that have openly said this is more dangerous than nuclear weapons, which, existentially it could be. And then I think we're starting to see the effects day to day of this at a task level hit different parts of the market. And I used the example of cybersecurity earlier and managed services. I think that one gets disrupted, like incredibly. But even I don't know about you, but I can open up my emails every morning and in my junk folder probably find 5 emails from different um, website design companies or building development houses, designers going, hey, we can build you a website. And I'm just thinking, they're gone. Like they are absolutely gone. If you've seen any of the good tools around what it's possible now to do in 2 hours for $50 with a website,
yeah,
so.
I did. I did it a couple of weeks ago. I set up the website of GoDaddy or something, and I just AI did the whole thing, and I curated it, human in the loop still, but just spot on. And there's a level of effort that can be removed with AI, and people don't realize it. And I've got some examples here I can talk about of the staggering capability of AI to do and manage me as a human. And I see AI as a thinking system, which is very different to how people, I think, see it.
Mm,
And looking as a coach, it's coaching me, it's teaching me,
yeah,
it's
and I think
exciting.
that's it. Yeah, I was having a conversation last night and sort of exploring this a little bit because I think we are entering a backlash phase for AI, but
Okay.
it's 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 sort of a very broad brush backlash as well, as has been the any conversations about AI. It's about AI, and AI, like any technology, um, needs to be decomposed into, well, what specific part of AI are you talking about, or what specific sort of technologies? And so there are people that have taken the time to understand what it is, to experiment with lots of the tools, and not just OpenAI or not just Anthropic, but some of these other tools like like Lovable, or like throw a rock and hit any of the AI enabled solutions that are out there. Even if you sort of, I've been playing around with building a little sort of LLM, and like that was a fun project, and it takes you into having to use two or three different AI solutions together. It's using generative AI, but it's a different level because you're now sort of constructing a stack of technology and you're developing the content and all that. But as the point is, there are those that are playing with AI and then those that are sort of using it in quite a blunt way. And I think the backlash is very broad, and I don't think it's going to be helpful because there are very positive ways that you can use it. Like as an example, I'm actually qualified book editor and publisher. That's how I started. That's how I got into tech. I graduated uni, did my postgraduate, started working for a couple of publishing houses, and then in the mid '90s, I got some some work and was introduced to this company that published technology research. I was like, "What's that?" And then that looked really interesting, and it was the same sort of insight that you had when you were selling Nissans, and then you sold one to the guy that worked at the tech company. It was a similar sort of thing for me. It was like, if I stay in publishing, I have to wait 40 years until I get Ian's job in the corner. And I looked at Ian and I'm like, I don't want Ian's job. I want that guy's job. And so I sort of transitioned that way. But, the point is this experimentation is very important that we continue to do that. And those are the tough conversations, to have, not just as a salesperson selling into an organization, but within an organization, itself. Because I mean, some of the questions that I'm seeing and like you, I have an advisory business alongside my analyst role. But it's the CEOs who are wondering if their current transformation programs, which have kind of been the same for the last 25 years, are they still the right ones to be doing, or organizations that have spent a couple of years making a major technology decision and have decided they're going to drop 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, 100 million on a new piece of technology or software and then implement it. So have we made the right decision in the last 6 months, and what does that mean? Or this, just this concept that organizations and leaders know that they have to transform, but not really having an idea about what they need to transform into or how they kind of do that. So it's this massive, inflection point of the recognition of change and the inability to understand how to sort of take the first steps. And I think some of it is because the messaging we're getting from the AI leaders in the market, it's very much about this future state. And that very much represents like level 4, level 5, level 6 maturity, as opposed to just showing people the front door. Like, and how can we upskill our staff? What is the project that's going to give us bang for buck? And then trying to coalesce the organization around that, because there will be winners and losers in this for sure. But that with 2026, we still seem to be in one of those confusing years where there's lots of technology, there's lots of messages, there's lots of people selling it, there's lots of people experimenting, but we're still cycling the flywheel.
Yeah, and the impact of AI in the third world, or where my business, and I should complete the cycle of my career, the last part of it. But when I spend a lot of time in Brazil and Chile and South America generally, and in other third world countries, Africa now, AI will not really be something that'll replace a guy begging, or replace a family fishing to feed their kids, or digging a hole in the ground to get iron ore out of diamonds. AI at the front of the coalface is unlikely to really have an impact for those people. But because we're a first world country who have a tremendous layer of knowledge workers and people who have laptops and sit down and do knowledge work. That's where the impact will be. And I don't think the third world today has as much risk with AI. But I think one of the reasons I left the technology company that I was in, which was selling fatigue management, which is where I went after IBM, is because they had a sort of a policy internally where they didn't want to use AI. They felt it was improper. And after 2 years, not even able to get them to use, the Microsoft AI tools, which were in the stack, I left. And I, again, come back to the point, sometimes the biggest risk in your career is staying where you are successful. And that company, unfortunately, has had a big kick in the ass as a result of the competitors using AI. And I think one of the terms I use when I'm talking to people is native AI companies. That I would deem myself to be a native AI company at the moment, is that I don't have the legacy of processes and systems and fear and people to be an inhibitor for change. So I can do whatever I want to do. People say, how many staff do you have? I said, 300,000 staff available at the click of a switch. And yeah, I've got the expertise. I can have an aviation expert here in seconds. I can have a priest here. I can have, anybody I want come into the room. It's almost like I'm running a seance, we're calling in the spirits, your grandmother's there, your grandfather was the train driver. AI has that capability. And when you're a native company, there is no inhibitor. There's nothing to stop you doing whatever you want to do. And I think the most important thing which has happened, which is really one of those breakthrough stages, is this recursive self-improvement. If I said to you, Peter, you're not going to be here much longer, build a successor to yourself. You can't do that, but AI now can do that. And it's rebuilding itself with its own successor. So the next version is not built by humans. It's built by itself.
Mm.
That's where we need a kill switch, because that's where the moment of, super, science fiction movies becomes a reality. And I think people are genuinely scared. But I do see people marching. I see people, going to be very aggressive on AI needs to be governed and controlled. And I think that's going to happen.
Yeah, it is. Like the regulation is coming late to this, which is astonishing given the scale. And you mentioned a couple of the IPOs before. I mean, $1 trillion, that's $1 million. Like, even saying it quickly, US, yeah. And you can't, it's ridiculously astonishing how large, those numbers are. And yeah, largely unregulated. And, we're starting to see the regulators push things out ahead of the government. And yeah, they're quasi-government and all the rest of it, but certainly the financial industry, with APRA and things like that, they're starting to go, hey, you need to be doing this. And the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank, Matt Collin, last week, come out and sort of saying, with all the work and experimenting they've been doing, it's, he sort of calls it work slop or AI slop or something. And it's, it was really, really sort of telling. But I think, everyone picked up on that headline, but the main headline is that they're using it and they're experimenting and they're trying it. And this is actually happening in real time, and it's happening very, very fast. And so it is a bit scary. It's very transitional. Is it, we've sort of been here before, when the whole world, for the first time at a global level, really deregulated its industries, its government industries in the 80s and 90s. There was a massive wave of deregulation across the globe. And essentially over the course of, 5, 6, 7 years, the global middle management layer was gutted. That's what happened when government privatized its transport arms, its energy arms, its finance and banking arms. I got to see it firsthand. My father worked for the Commonwealth Bank for most of his life when it was owned by the government, and then he hung on for about 6 years. He was one of the last to go, but eventually they went, "Sorry, John, it's time for you to go. You didn't make the cut." And
John was a measurer. He was a measurer. And that's the role. That's the role in the business at the moment. If you're a measurer, you either learn how to use AI and manage AI as an agent manager, and you'll be able to survive.
Yeah.
and
So
that's their
that's
new job. You know,
the reskilling is really important. It is an important is an important part of people figuring it out. But it's still, I think, once we get through these IPOs, the world starts to settle down a little bit more, because at the moment we're we're in the finance economy of AI, where it's all about, and what we're going to do is create more and larger billionaires faster than they've ever been created before within a couple of months. But then these organizations become public companies, and a lot of the challenges that large organizations are having with trying to figure out AI, especially around cost and the pricing models, all those market forces start to come into play, because we're realizing AI is very expensive to build out, and all the investment capex that's going into it. Once you become a public company and everyone gets to see how you're carrying that debt and how you're financing it, and then what your growth looks like if you're selling stuff, on the front end of that, and then the costs associated with those pricing models, and then all of a sudden we're like, okay, now we're in a real economy, in a regulated market, and we all can start to make decisions. And the reality is, at that point, the market will rationalize a little. Initially, like, there'll be some companies that blow up. They're like, we can't compete. And then, but organizations will have some surety around the inputs into the programs that they need to drive, whether or not they are employee rationalization programs, or whether they're new service transformation programs, or whether or not they're rethinking their global supply chains. And we'll see some kind of a reversal of the massive offshoring and BPO, trillion-dollar industries that have grown up. And again, only in the time that we've been working, James, like early 2000s, the banks in Australia were only just experimenting with business process offshoring. And now everyone's got a captive center, and like ANZ, and everybody's got a business in India or the Philippines or whatever. We're going to see massive disruption around that space. And so we're really just at the start. But it is, when you hear comments from banking CEOs going, well, it's work slop and it's this, and you questions around the cost, we know we've got a little way to go, but we're also not putting the genie back in the bottle.
they're all very, very topical and very good points. And I think I said it to my girlfriend this morning, who's in finance. I said, have you had any of your sales leaders or team leaders come up and say, what's my token quota for next year? I did a video for what I'm on an advisory board for a small software company, as helping the guy out, and he wanted to do some messaging. And I said, here you go, I'll write up a prompt. Got into Banana from Google, created a video of the product. Guy put the phone out, he's got software on it. And he said, oh, I want the accent to be Australian. I said, I forgot to put the Australian accent into the prompt. So I redid the prompt and said, put him with an Australian Oka accent. He's supposed to be a tradie rather than an American accent. And
Make him a koala.
Yeah, that's right. It says, you've maxed out it came back and said, you've maxed out your token quota for the day. And I was going, oh, no, I won't have to pay more. Wait till tomorrow. Is it the time zone of America? I can maybe wait an hour and probably get the next day. I'm trying to work it out. But that token quota conversation, AI is not cheap. It's free at the moment for everybody if you want to have the free version. And as you and I know, the versions, when you pay for them, they're majorly different. But there are companies that are going to consume so much tokens that they're going to end up with a serious budgetary challenge.
Yes. Yeah.
I think some people don't understand what that really means for the data centers, and it's already a huge amount of pushback on data. And then we've got some magical fear and uncertainty in data about what AI is really all about.
This system of cost is one of those topical areas that we'll see massive movement in the next 12 months. And certainly from the conversations I'm having with some of the tech vendors, they've been able to avoid it to now, because everyone's sort of in experimentation mode. Everyone's in gold rush mode. these aren't public companies that we're talking about, all that changes. All that changes very quickly. And so the internal costs are known, but they're not publicly known. They're not publicly shared. And then certainly as we've seen with cloud computing, companies aren't going to just pick one AI company. They're going to be working with 5, 10, 20, 50. And so the ability to see transparent costs from each of the AI solution providers so that we can consider that as businesses in terms of how we're delivering end-to-end services becomes really important. And it will happen. We're getting closer to that. And that's when we'll get a real sense of
So that can work, yeah.
how fast this is going to move ahead. And it's going to be like the internet, and it's going to be like cloud, and it's going to be, we're going to go whoop, and then take, because it's not going anywhere, because the capabilities of this technology are astonishing, which is why, your story about like the last tech company you ended up in before leaving, that it's important that all companies, not just banks and governments and small to medium businesses who might be in manufacturing or retail or whatever, that not only that the customers of these technologies are actually repositioning, but also if you're a technology company yourself, um, it's astonishing, your story, that they that a company like that didn't want to consider AI, and then essentially very quickly have had their lunch eaten. And so I think it's very difficult for organizations to kind of go, is this really happening? We're not sure. Maybe if we just keep going and
It's like
ignore it, we'll be fine.
it's like the Agfa moment, Ah, no, we'll be fine. 45 mil film development, that's all. It's like go on forever, and things change, and you need to be able to hear the wagon coming before you see it, and I had this sort of oh my god moment when I was at this company, and to be honest, it wasn't the only reason why I left. The founder, who was a medical doctor, passed on, and the leadership of the company changed in that period of time. So about 12 months ago, I left and took an exit, and it was a startup company, and it grown all over Brazil and South America, and I had a fantastic, growth. We grew it from zero to $10 million company, and it was going up and up. But AI then came in, and the competitors were using AI, and I wanted to change the product offering to AI, enable the product to keep us on the front foot, but the culture didn't allow it. And I see, somebody offered me a job the other day at a company, a very well-known company here in Brisbane. And I said, no, I'm not interested. They said, why would you not even go to the job interview? I said, first of all, I'm not looking for a job at the moment. I'm actually quite happy not having a boss. And I'm financially independent. I don't need the money coming in immediately. But I couldn't see myself in a technology company fighting with everybody on a daily basis to implement AI. And the cultural tooth pulling, I'd be looked on as the dentist without the anesthetic. I would just be the most horrible job. No one would want to speak to me. That's that guy over there. He's like, when I first bought my first electric vehicle 6 years ago, I bought a Tesla 6 years ago. There was anxiety everywhere about them blowing up. And I felt like that's what it would feel like. I'd be like trying to implement electric vehicles 6 years ago. It was just you're going against the grain. And
What
I
if you
think a
had
lot of
to?
these,
What if you had to? Like, what if you had to? And sort of going back to, earlier stories, you were super successful in technology sales at a global level, and now this is happening, and your mantra of refuse to lose. If you are the head of a sales team now, what do you say to your sales team? Because there literally are the noise. Could you imagine? Like, oh, I did my 10 years in Sydney, and it was in the 90s and early 2000s, but you could still get a meeting with the CIO, and then of most organizations. But then in the preceding years, every global technology always sees Sydney as a gateway to Australia, which is crazy because I think, Brisbane, Melbourne, like there are other cities where you could get a real strong foothold and then launch into Sydney. But every technology company on the planet having an office in Sydney with all those salespeople calling the same organizations day in, day out, how do you get traction?
Well, it's a it's a question I'm tormenting myself with at the moment. I think that, and I've spoken to probably about 6 companies and done 3 or 4 paid for engagements in Brisbane the last 6 months on AI. And I've more or less told them, I don't come to you with a team of software services boys in a bus outside waiting to charge you $800, $1,200 an hour, $1,500, $2,500 an hour. If you're going to use AI, you need to grow the muscles yourself. And what I want you to do is to find 2 or 3 people in your company. I'll give you an example. There was a recruitment company here in Brisbane who I've known for years. And the CEO of the company, the C-level people, said, "Look, I think I need to understand a little bit about AI. Can you tell me about it?" So I sat down and explained to him. And I said, "Here's a couple of videos to look at. This will explain what it is exactly and how it works and how to prompt and what a prompt is. And it's a thinking system, not a processing tool. It's not Google search." Anyway, he came back to me and said, "I love what I'm saying. Can you come in and tell me what you can do with AI in the business?" So I said, what we need to do is we need to find 3 processes that are a knowledge worker. For example, if you put an ad up on LinkedIn on a Saturday morning, and then on Monday morning you come in, there's 800 CVs. How long will the 800 CVs take to be read by the team and categorized based on skills and suitability for the position description? He says, well, that would take probably a week to read the 800 CVs. I said, well, let's put a number on it. So we put a number of 5 days with 2 people, for example. Then I said, what we'll do is we'll take that and we'll put it into a GPT, which we created, which is just grabbed off the internet, which takes all the CVs, matches them against the position description, and does all that in seconds. And there's a certain amount of human review on that. I'm not saying it's completely autonomous, but the reality was he saved 5 days. And then it said, of these top 20%, create meetings and send out invitations to these candidates who apply for the job. So that one task alone saved all that work. And, you know, he's not going to fully AI enable his whole business, but sections of the business are very, very easy to remove that onerous to work that no one wants to do. And so he's gone off and done that, plus another couple of other ideas I gave him about training the candidates with AI enablement in their CVs to make them better candidates, and lots of simple things like that. And that's where I see the opportunity. But I said to him, I'm not here to sell you services. I'm here to train you to do the work and grow the muscles yourself. Because that's the best way to get people to use AI, is to use it themselves. Having a consulting firm coming in and telling everyone how to use AI, I reckon is an uphill struggle. And it'll be, one of the reasons why I don't really want to go out and try and sell services to people. I just want to give people a direction, give them some guidance on what not to do, put guardrails around the playbook and start off. And once they get momentum internally, it'll take on its own life and move forward, as did IBM Connections when it was implemented, the adoption curve. And there are lots of big services companies out there now. We've got the new position of the forward deployed engineer with Google, and all the big AI companies have now got this new role which didn't exist. So to that point, I think there's a lot of new roles which will happen. And the ability to manage an agent is a position which will be the most important thing, in my view, inside a business. The ability to know what an agent is doing, to be able to manage it, control it, tweak it, and make it work in the business will make you the supreme leader. I mean, that's what it'll be.
I've seen a bunch of stories around that being one of the key roles, and look, I don't disagree with it, but I once you start playing around, especially with this technology at an enterprise level, you realize there are some skills involved, and so I think some of the more technically minded people will naturally pivot to those sort of agent manager roles, because yes, we might get to a point relatively quickly where if I've got a customer service team and I'm the manager of that customer service team, and I know I've got 25 customer service people, and they cycle in and out whenever their leave is, whether they're working regular shifts and all the rest of it, 24-hour clock, whatever it is. But then I've got 500 agents. Then it's I think there's a big difference between like being a shift manager and sort of responding to alerts or prompts on a team of
Sure.
500 agents versus actually being the one who, which I think what the original intent of being a manager of agents was about, was actually sort of being more hands-on in the development of the business rules and the governance and the risk and the cyber and all those sort of things. So yeah, lots to play out in that space. But I think what is absolutely true is that there will be an explosion of that sort of capability. But like one of the things you've spoken a bit about over the last few months is the SaaS apocalypse. I know it's a topic that you've got some strong thoughts on. So I mean, where are you today on the SaaS apocalypse? What is it for people who don't know?
Yeah, so I put a LinkedIn post up a few months ago, and that LinkedIn post got 37,000, at last, 37,000 views. And the post was basically a photograph, which I generated with AI, of a group of people with t-shirts on the back showing IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, and they're all queuing up outside a unemployment office with 5 Tesla robots, Optimus robots at the door, you know? And these are the people of my age who didn't want to adopt AI internally. And as we've seen from many of the big tech companies, if you don't use AI and don't do your certification, you're the first one on the first round to get punted out of the business. Amazon just did it. Meta did it. They actually trained, they turned around about 6 months after they actually got everyone new laptops. The new laptops had software on it that actually followed the movements of the cursor in the mouse all day. And Meta was training an AI agent to replace that person's job. It's kind of dirty in the industry to do that. It's like everything you're doing every day is actually being used when you didn't know about it to create a better replica of you and building your successor. And that's what Meta did. And you know, the use of AI in that respect is kind of sneaky and dirty. But what to a SaaS apocalypse, the article coming back to it was, I remember in IBM, it was all about how many seats of the software you could sell, how many processor value units could you sell? How many GPUs or, you know, so the quantity of sales, how many seats do you need? But when you have a team of agents running, you know, connected to your SAP, instead of having 60 people in payables and 60 people in receivables, you know, you just need one agent to do it all. That means you only really need one agent license and log into the software. So that means that there's 60 and 60 licenses are gone. And that model in the software industry is caused chaos because if you don't need a team of humans logged in and you need one agent or 2 or 3 agents, the ramifications for licensing are significantly different. And this sort of SaaS apocalypse thing has happened. As in some of the share prices, some of these big, you know, blue chip software companies have been damaged badly. Adobe, Microsoft, even. I mean, they might all be going after AI, but the uncertainty of how the software model of licensing works in the new age has ridiculously damaged their values as companies.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely some rationalization and some repricing going on. I think a couple of things. I There's definitely going to be rationalization of the software as a service market, and but I think it's tied to the conversation we were having before, where since the early 20 teens, there's been an explosion of apps in in the world in the workplace, and that's because cloud finally got cloud infrastructure finally got settled in, and then we started to see this transition of legacy applications into the cloud environment and eventually to as a service. But then we've seen a massive rise in native software as a service as well for everything, not looking to do the whole enterprise stuff, but specific parts. And then that went hand in hand with the rise of these buying centers across the organization, because all of a sudden you didn't have to wait for IT. You could do it on your own credit card. And you know what? I actually have this specific software as a service piece that I can plug in and use, and I don't have to worry about anything else. What I think we're going to see is a rationalization of a lot of the rats and mice in that as a service application explosion that's grown up. And so that will help in trying to rationalize. So I think we're going to have a general period or cycle of application rationalization work as part of this move to AI. And then a lot of the smaller ones will just go because you don't need them, because you literally can do those. You can build those things on Replit really, really quickly. The governance and things is another question. But then if we move into the enterprise sort of side of things, and they're the companies that you said that have been smashed on the New York Stock Exchange and the Nasdaq and every exchange around the planet. There's definitely a repricing going on, but I think that has pretty much highlighted a gap between your traditional financial analysts and your technology analysts. And I don't think the financial analysts have really ever cared too much about the technology and how it works. And so I think the financial analysts are taking longer to catch up to what AI is and how it works. And then if a technology vendor says they're an AI company, what does that even mean? And they're a native, and if they're a legacy one, how are they applying it and all that sort of stuff. So we're seeing a repricing, but I think ultimately what will happen is that a number of these legacy companies, which are very strong financial companies and have great solutions, I actually think that their software as a service or platform as a service, because the infrastructure is so tightly tied with it now, um, their licensing actually gets more expensive, but a quid pro quo is that it's demonstrably better because it's being tied in this AI move to, you're not buying a transactional engine, you are buying an experience or an outcome. And so the software is going to deliver much faster and with much better capability, the experience you want. You'll go, yeah, I'll pay more for that. So the SaaS apocalypse isn't going to be a generic global war. I think it's going to be guerrilla warfare, and then like there'll be some dominant sort of players.
I think though that there's a component to this which we haven't covered, is that the consumer, when they ask a customer, when the customer comes to the company and says, do my audit and my tax return. Traditionally, that would be a time and materials that we spent 4 days. We talk to your finance team, and now here's the tax return. It's done. With AI, I've had this conversation with a few people in the finance industry. The outcome is achieved differently. Human effort involved is radically reduced. I think the customers will expect that can't be the way that they're going to be charged anymore. So for my services delivery, what I do is I actually charge an outcome-based price. And, the outcome, if it's good or bad, that's my responsibility to make sure it is. I'm a human in the loop. I'm not just getting AI to create the outcome. But that journey from the beginning of the task to the end of the task is compressed. And I think the customers will decide on who they want to buy from.
Mm.
I was using AI, and I talked a little bit this for antique and furniture business. And I said, I uploaded a spreadsheet into AI and said, here's the spreadsheet of all the purchases and the sales and the times and where I bought them, who bought them. Give me some recommendations. And it said, you need to buy a lighting system and take better photographs to stage your items with better things on them, and you have a 20% revenue increase. I did it, clicked on the link, and it said, we can buy from Shopify, and it's connected it. And all of a sudden, I'm doing the photography a bit better, using AI to generate better content, and the business has increased its revenue on the same product 20% more. So the amount of time I'm spending has reduced, and exponentially the value that I'm getting in is higher. So I think people will learn from that experience that AI can do, like, take a photograph of your house. And I did it the other day with my girlfriend. She said, I want to get new carpet. I said, what's the carpet look like? So I took the photograph of the room and said, there you go. There's the green carpet, there's the yellow carpet, the blue carpet. We didn't have to go down and get the samples and do all that stuff. So I think people, as they use AI, will realize there's a compression of time achievable. And that time can't be charged by companies doing consulting work. And that's an area that you're involved in. I know it's a horrible conversation, but that getting to the document, getting to the tender submission, getting to the statement of work, the time to do that has changed. And I think that the days of charging the way we used to charge, we're going to have to change, as do the software companies for their access to the product. So it's almost as if the agentic economy has changed the rules in economics, and it'll actually spill across, and it'll create opportunity, not just disrupt, but through disruption is opportunity. And the smart people will understand where the opportunity is. And this is where the next stage of AI, I think, is probably, in my view, there's three parts of AI which really are game changer. The first one is this sort of breakthrough of the recursive self-improvement, where it builds its successor. That is mind-blowingly complicated to explain to people, but it just basically means it can replicate itself without a human. But when it gets to the next stage, which is the physicality of AI and the vision in AI, which I use vision AI to see things, look at things, and make observations about the world, that connectivity will allow robotics then to really get connected. And, I'm the first one to admit I'm going to put in an order for a robot. I want to be the guy who walks into the meeting with the robot. And I say, I've got brought with me the world of brains inside of my robot. Now, it might be a Tesla robot, it might be Optimus, I don't know. But
Jimmy Jr.
Jimmy Jr. And, I think that the thing we're seeing at the moment is that AI hasn't got any physicality in our world at this point. But that's going to change. I mean, Musk has just closed down one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world in his suite, killed off the model to build 20,000 robots a month or whatever it is he's doing. I can't remember the numbers. But now the ability to see the physicality of AI means it's not just an app on the phone or on your keyboard. I mean, I actually don't even type with AI anymore. I just talk to it. And I think these are things which are going to change the way technology is measured and used. If you're just talking to your software all the time, like I'm on the board of this small company, and I said to the guy, the biggest problem you have is that the interface with your software, which is like a billing and system it's on a phone. You have to type in, take a photograph of the hedge you cut, take a photograph of the lawn you cut, then upload it, and then hopefully head office grab it and send an invoice out. So we turn it around and I put AI on top of that. So it's fully voice activated. And that means that the licensing, is the same that he does, but it's basically voice activated. So the way you interact with software has changed. And I just see that physicality of AI, that next stage, which we're going to see.
It's definitely, it will definitely be a massive inflection point. And it's, I think I was having a conversation with someone about this just 2 days ago, and they're electrician. They're semi-retired. His daughter is coming through, finishing high school, wants to do an apprenticeship as an electrician. And I showed him a photo of the Optimus, and I said, "This will be the future of an electrician. You, for half the cost of bringing on an apprentice, you will take this robot to the job with you, and they will go up in the crawl space and under the house, and they will rewire this and all the rest of it." And so for whatever they're saying, the retail price is going to be somewhere between 20 and 30,000 initially. You could have 3 or 4 of these as an electrician or a plumber, let alone in the knowledge industries that we're sort of talking about. What I don't like about the sort of staged rollout is they've very clearly said it's going to high industry and big business first. And so the timeline is that they're sort of talking the end of 2027, early 2028, and then it will sort of step down until maybe 2030, 2031 before they will be publicly available to smaller organizations. And so the challenge I see with that is that, especially in, like, let's take the knowledge industry, for example, you give the big four a 3-year head start on anyone else, and you're not catching up. You're not catching up with that kind of thing. And so to me, this is again where the regulation thing is going to be tricky. We're going to see them deployed, in manufacturing environments. And the irony is that robots are so often used in imagery to talk about AI now. There's no robots. There's still these things in the factories. There's there's none of these things.
But I do think Johnny Ives was supposed to bring out he's the head of Apple sort of design, and he's working with ChatGPT, and they're talking about having like an Apple home or, with AI in it. And I think that the physicality, that's the first step. But I watched a very interesting video on the issues around robotics, and I've worked in the health and safety industry for many years with the fatigue management product that I was involved with for 10, 12 years. And I've been to mining companies, been on the environmental in factories and everything. the robots are not actually suitable to have around humans because of the risk factor. They don't have the ability, like if I am sitting beside you and I put my hand on your shoulder, I'm not going to crush your whole arm and break every bone in your shoulder. The robots don't have the spatial awareness of safety. So they have to be protected and out of human contact initially. But I think that will change. But the first robots will be only suitable to use in industrial environments. But what I'm really talking about is a walking, talking humanoid version of AI, ChatGPT or Manus or whatever it is you're using. So if you can imagine, welcome to Claude, but Claude is a physical person. And in the room, he's listening or she is listening or it's listening, the gender of the robot. And then I'll say, well, today, Claude, he's going to come with me, but it's raining. You need a raincoat and you need special shoes. And there's a whole industry that's going to blow up all around the robotics, and if
Let's
it's a domestic situation, do you want the robot? What do you want it to do today? And do you need to have a wife or a girlfriend anymore? And then it brings together, do you need
James,
God?
I think
Do
the
you need,
answer to that is yes.
well, I hope that's the case. But there are generations which don't really see humans in the same way as we do.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and that's certainly a generational thing as well. That there's definitely an intellectual movement which is quite frightening in its ideology. But let's take this full circle. Wouldn't it be absolutely wonderful for you to buy your dad an Optimus and have him there in the Gorry galleries in Dublin as a transition and just this ongoing legacy of fine art and furniture dealership and being like just to think about the potential of that. Even forget big business, like there we can humanize this stuff, and I think it's important. I was listening to you, and I'm thinking also, surely there's a way to apply this to help solve our challenges with the NDIS in Australia. I like I'm a part-time carer for my wife, who has a number of chronic illnesses, and I just think, how helpful would it be to have an Optimus around the house when I can't be here, when I have to travel, or just when I have to like the. I think we can too often you jump to the negative rather than think about the positive opportunities that sort of exist. And I know money gets in the way and competition gets in the way and all that grossness gets in the way. And this is also, those comments that Elon Musk has made about it's more dangerous than nuclear weapons and all the rest of it. But somewhere in humanity, there are good people wanting to do good things, and this is going to be with us. And so how can we just make sure it becomes a positive influence? Like when you and I are sitting here and looking back in 5 years and laughing at all the ridiculous things we've said in the past 2 hours, wouldn't that be a nice thought to think there are some actually human-based positive outcomes from this amazing technology?
the access to healthcare and medical profession at the moment is apparently if you're a psychiatrist or psychologist, you can't get a meeting with them. These people are,
Yes,
uh,
yes,
you know,
exactly.
and so many people who are, and I'm doing it as well. Like if I have some challenges with my children, I'll ask AI to, again, very much get the correct prompt. It's not the Google prompt. How do I help my son? It's my son's betraying this example, and he said he did, and then his friend said, and he's a bit worried about this, and also it comes back and helps you. So there's a tremendous amount of people. I think there's some statistic from ChatGPT released that something like 35% of its use was from children who were using it to talk. I don't know. My mum and dad hate me. My legs are fat. The girls call me chubby, whatever it is. And there's all these conversations that these people are having, and the interaction with I have with AI. I have a daily meeting with my CEO because I'm my own boss, but I need to have a team around me to work, and that's what my AI is, my team. And it teases and I'd say, suggest to me the top 3 things I need to talk about today. I'm not going to read the internet tomorrow, so I get AI to give me the things that are most salient, most appropriate to me. But what AI is going to take the next step is the ability to become a replica of my thinking. So if I'm inputting my medical data, my personal conversations, the recipes for the food I want to cook, the holiday and the journey I want to take. I booked a holiday and went all around Europe on AI. Didn't go to travel agents. That industry gone, in my view. That's something that's just going to change as well. But this AI of James will become my second brain. And then when the robots are available, I'll just flip my AI into the robot, and the robot will actually be everything that I've been for the last 5 years with AI. In the memory will be there. It'll have my personality. It'll have my humor. It'll have my history of what I like to do, what music I like to listen to, what I like to watch on TV. And the future of humanity in this first world agentic economy is a bigger conversation, because that sort of personality in that person is a replica of me. And if I died, and which I will die, maybe I'll be so loved and missed. I doubt it, but maybe when the funeral home says to my family, he's left us, but we actually have access to his AI account, and we can actually create on an app for $10 a month full access to James, so your grandchildren can still talk to Granddad James. And I think that these are very big conversations to have, and you have to keep your mind open on. But
Yeah.
there's maybe there's positivity in there, and losing a lost one, as we all have, as you know, that might be something that the younger people will actually want.
Yeah, I
And I
think
think
so. I think that's another thing that gets, tarnished with some negativity as well, and people thinking, "Oh, it's not real," and all the rest of it. But it was the 2-year anniversary of my dad passing 3 days ago, and we've got a little voice clip of, of him on my phone, with him answering mum and dad's old home answering machine. And I played it a couple of times because I wanted to hear his voice, and it's it'd
that
be
is a healing
yes,
emotional thing. Yes.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So
With that though comes trust and verification,
yeah,
and I think that the trust. Like people say, "No, I don't want to use AI because it hallucinates." I said, "Mate, I know more people who've worked with me who've hallucinated more regularly than AI. They guarantee me that it's going to work. I know what I'm doing. I'll do the demo. I've done it before. Leave it to me." And it doesn't work. I said, so I think there's a trust issue, but I think the politicalization of AI is about to happen, as we discussed earlier. And I have also been reading, and I thought of it actually of registering a domain, which would be god.ai, a year ago, but that's already gone. And, I think that there's already 2 or 3 religious groups. I was speaking to a friend of mine who is from Israel. He's Jewish, a very close friend of mine yesterday. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we could create a new religion that's based out of AI? And so I've actually done some research, and it's already happened. There's a huge amount of religious groups who are creating AI agents and bots to interact and preach and to do confessions. And you can dial up the church, and the church tells you, blessed be for your sins and all, what you should do. And there's a new religion be created from this as well, which is
yeah.
very different.
Well,
But I think the big thing is that when it gets out of control, who has the kill switch? That's what keeps me awake at night time. There isn't a kill switch for this. And if it's fully building its successor and it doesn't need humans to train it, this becomes this dystopian sort of nightmare science fiction movie that no one really wants to watch on their own on the couch in case they get, an alien invades the house and kills them.
yeah,
I think that we kind of, science fiction has always been something we wrote, and then we've actually generated it. The
yeah.
Jetsons.
I think the blast zone of that will be slightly greater than the automated vacuum cleaner spreading the dog poop all around the lounge room. You've probably seen those videos. I think these are questions that they're never going to go away. I think the reality is that people like you and I have absolutely zero control over them. But makes it interesting in the context of definitely what's happening in the financial markets in the US, where such a very few humans are being endowed with power and authority that we've never seen before, and that is frightening. And how this year plays out, and what the next couple of years hold for us. I think we continue to move forward in as humans. Like you say, we get up. What are we doing today? Who are we talking to? Are we making a positive contribution towards our goals? What are those goals, whether they're financial or social or family oriented or like whatever it is? That's what we can do, and sort of take a healthy mindset into it. Look after ourselves, and we'll all be okay because we'll all be okay. You're doing fine. Like I'm doing fine. A lot of people are doing fine. We can get very distracted inside our heads these days. I'm not on a lot of social media anymore. I'm not on any of the big ones, and I, I I I try to manage disconnected time every single day. I'm back into my roots in terms of my publishing and book editing. I'm loving reading. I sort of lost that skill for many years, distracted by technology. I'm getting back to that. We never got to talk about your stories about, what you're doing around the Irish art and the mid-century furniture and things like that. But they're perfect examples of how we can stay grounded.
Absolutely. And I think that, the future of the world is AI as a competitive advantage if you know how to use it. Everybody has their own ways of doing things, but I think that being a good person and being a mentor and helping people to understand the AI and not be frightened of it and be able to control it, even as a parent, looking at social media usage and educating people on what not to do is sometimes the most important part of this.
Yeah.
But I think that there is an enormous, this is not an industrial revolution. This is a sci-fi revolution that we're about to go through. It's a sci-fi moment. It's where you sit there and you watch the movie and you suddenly get up off the couch and the movie's real.
Yeah. How exciting. This is definitely the biggest and most exciting stuff
Mm.
that's happened in technology in decades. Like it trumps anything that's happened since the early 2000s. But mate, this is probably a good place to stop. I think you and I could talk for 6 or 7 hours, which is good for us, not for
I
everyone
could probably,
else. But
I could probably do it for 10.
Mr. Gorry, Jimmy G, thank you very much. I think we should talk again. You know, like early next year or something. See what's sort of played out. But thank you as always for your time. It's always great to catch up, and hopefully get to see you in the near future and hear more of your sort of insights in terms of where you're doing, who you're working with, and all those problems you're trying to solve.
Well, thanks, Peter. It's been great to talk to you, and I appreciate our friendship over the years, not just on a business level, but personally. You're a good human, and I think hopefully our existence will be forever adored as being a good thing, hopefully, in an AI world. But yeah, good humans. Yeah, good to talk to you, Peter, and appreciate your time.
Thanks,
It's
mate.
been
Take
great.
care.